Remains in 5 minutes. Remains is the retelling of a story which has two parts to it. Two parts that essentially are divided at this point. Prior to this, it is the incident itself that is retold by the soldier. And it's retold in quite a, what I'd say, dispassionate, lacking any kind of passionate, a dispassionate, almost casual way, as though he's just reporting something that happened to him this morning. But what happens then is we then get the later effects, the after effects, the trauma that we get afterwards. And this is desperate and destructive. And there's our two parts to it. Now it begins with an ambiguous title, one that has potentially several meanings. The remains could of course refer in the first half to the man's body that they kill, but of course at the same time refers to the remains of his, what's left with him, his memory. And what we then see is it's very clear to us which is worse. You'd think it's the remains of a body, but it's not. So in this opening one, what do we get? We get the very casual language. On another occasion we get sent out that kind of an idea here. One of them legs it up the road. And then the crux, the moral dilemma. This is the problem he has. So he's serving in somewhere, Afghanistan, Iraq, wherever. He's serving out in one of those, and one of those places. And up comes this person to them. Now, if this person running at them is probably armed, they have to obviously take action. So it's a moral dilemma, but I think the thing that we would look at is it is understandable, the decision that he makes. It's really doing his job. Okay? But unfortunately, the doubt is in there. Just that tiny element. It would be very different if it was possibly armed, probably not. It's almost certain he was. So, basically, it's not just him. Him, somebody else, all at the same time. Yet, again, notice he kind of like dehumanises them by making them just somebody else and somebody else. But at the same time, makes them into a team, all working together. They see him around as it rips through his life. The key phrase here, just like, for example, he's described as sort of inside out. Again, the horror, but told casually. The verb ripping, as in ripping through his life, is particularly horrific, but it's through his life, not through his body. It's a recognition that basically he is a living person that's going to die. And he just becomes the image of agony. Nothing else is important to him. And then the casualness with which one of his mates tosses his guts back in the body and he's carted off shows you the everyday occurrence that this is. So we move into the trauma further down. Clearly with the end of story, except not really. And that's the point here. We get this image of a blood shadow that's left, whether it's literal or metaphorical. The idea is that this is what remains. And the use of blood seems to represent the guilt, the idea of the blood on his hands that he's going to come back to at the end down here. His bloody life in my bloody hands. Okay? Very like it's used in things like Macbeth. As he goes home though, he comes home on leave, and we get this very important triad here. Blink, sleep, dream. Closing his eyes at 3 levels. 1, briefly, blinking. And what do we get? Him bursting through the doors of the bank. A description we don't get earlier. When he goes a little bit further closing eyes and falls asleep, we're back to the repetition of the moral dilemma, the doubt in his mind. And when he then goes into his unconscious, he sees the horror of what he does. So essentially the three get worse as it goes on. He tries drugs and drink that don't flush him out. Notice the idea of flushing, attempt to get rid of him here. What instead we get is that when he closes his eyes, he's dug in behind enemy lines, like some kind of special services soldier. Okay? The only way he can understand this, it seems, is using that kind of war imagery, as opposed to the reality underneath. He's left his bloody life in my bloody hands.